Hello and welcome to TiVo, where we talk about tactics and their evolution. Today we're going to be talking about progressive passing and the players in the Premier League that play that role for their clubs. First of all, what is a progressive pass? This is the definition taken from fbref.com, which is the source of the data used for today's video and the underlying analysis. It is a completed pass that moves the ball towards the opponent's goal at least 10 yards from its furthest point in the last 6 passes. Or, regardless of what came before it, it can be a completed pass into the penalty area. It only includes the top 60% of the pitch. In other words, it is a pass where a player is taking a bit of a risk, is trying to move their team towards the opponent's goal. And who is progressive? This is the question we're going to be addressing in this video. Here's a quick example of a progressive pass in case that isn't clear. You would expect probably, if you're a follower of the Premier League, to see that Cancelo comes through towards the top of these rankings. Here is Mr. Cancelo making a progressive pass from more or less exactly on the halfway line, looking to find, I think it is Foden in this case, running in behind or running into the channel of the Manchester United defence. So here is a good example of what we are talking about from real life. And what we're going to look at now in a second is the players that come towards the top of the progressive passing league table. This is a scatter plot, doesn't have any names on it yet, that's going to come in a minute. But just to explain how we're doing this, the source of the data is the wonderful website fbref.com, who use a variety of different data sources, I believe, the main one being StatsBomb, the football analytics company. You can see from left to right, we're looking at the overall number of completed passes per player. So each of these blue dots ultimately is a football player plying their trade in the English Premier League. So completed passes per 90 minutes, so that it's comparable. And then from bottom to top, we have progressive passes per 90 minutes. We have excluded players who as yet have not played very many matches, so anyone playing less than 5 90-minute periods is not included in this analysis. We've also excluded those who have 0, who have not completed any progressive passes on average in a 90-minute time period, which is mainly goalkeepers, as you can imagine, although this data does include Ederson, interestingly, I think is the only goalkeeper who from time to time completes one of these progressive passes. The purpose of these types of passes, as opposed to sideways or backwards passes, is to move the ball further towards the opposition's goal. The defensive structure of the opposition is attempting to prevent this sort of play. They want to move the ball further away from their own goal, obviously. These types of passes are therefore relatively difficult to execute, and what we can imagine is that the types of players who excel at this type of passing are relatively technically proficient, as we saw with the example of Cancelo. So let's take a look right now at the players towards the top right, who are both above average in the number of completed passes overall, but also above average in the number of progressive passes that they compete on average in a 90-minute time period. These are the players who make the top 10 for the first 6 months of this season's Premier League. Some of these names are to be expected. Some of these are, I think, a little bit surprising. So if we take the top performer on the progressive passes per 90 list, this is Thiago, and anyone who's watched Thiago would probably expect him to be on this list. Relatively technically proficient, in fact an excellent technician, is really notable in the extent to which he looks for forward passes. Alexander-Arnold plays a somewhat similar role to Cancelo, again no surprise there. Pogba, again no surprise, much maligned, but in certain aspects of his game, such as this one, he excels. Kante is somewhat surprising, seen as more of a holding midfielder, although we have seen his role evolve over the last couple of years to be a more front foot player, rather than just protecting the back line and tackling and so on. Xhaka, again much maligned player, but probably more for his indiscipline and his defensive mistakes, would generally be considered to be good on the ball. De Bruyne is an obvious one. Milner, I think, is really interesting, and this can tell us about some of the bias that I think when we just watch and we don't look at the underlying data. He tends to be seen as hardworking, letting other players around him flourish. But what this data is showing is that he is relatively effective in moving the ball up the pitch towards the opposition's goal. Robertson, we can all think of those passes that he plays down the line to Mane, for example, as part of his repertoire. That makes sense. Zinchenko as well. I think one thing to point out about this is that all of these players play at top level clubs. Top 6 certainly, aspiring to be top 4, if not to win the league. Most of these players are going to be, in fact, all of these players are going to be on the ball a lot, just due to the dominance of possession that these players have. So what we're now going to take a look at is a different way of looking at the same underlying data, but try to take out the effect of that kind of big club bias. And what we're going to do is look at of the passes that those players make. So from that starting point, how many of them are progressive? So this would take out the effect of having the ball all the time and, in general, playing for a dominant team. What we are looking at now, therefore, is for any given pass that an individual player makes across all the players in the Premier League for the first 6 months of the season. For that given pass, how likely is it to be a progressive one? Or put in a slightly different way, if a player was to make 100 passes in the Premier League so far this season, how many of them would be defined as progressive? So we can reveal the names in a second. You can see that the top one is making a progressive pass nearly 22% of the time, so nearly 1 in 5 of those passes are progressive, followed by 1 in 5, and so on and so forth. So let's look at the names in a second. But again, what this is doing, I'd say, in part, is taking out that big club effect. Looking at the players who are most efficient, given the amount of possession that they have as individuals. And this is what happens when you strip out some of that big club effect, and specifically strip out the effect of players who play in a team, play in a system, who would tend to dominate possession. We can see here a really, really interesting pattern of players that play for teams, especially I would say Leeds, for example, who try to move the ball as quickly as possible, through the thirds, playing vertical possession football. It's sometimes referred to as. So we see Raphael in there, and we see Jack Harrison as the 10th most progressive, again taking out that effect of high possession teams. You see a Brentford player, Canos. I'm pretty sure that's not how you pronounce his name, but we'll go with that for now. Fornals, of course, for West Ham. Joe Pedro at Watford. A couple of Aston Villa players in there as well. Again, in Matt Target. So I'm not going to dwell on this and spend ages going through each of the names, but I just think it's really interesting to see which of those players are more efficient in moving the ball further towards the opposition's goal. What I really like about this type of information is that it should take a lot of the subjectivity out of the debate around football. For example, it is often said by many people online at the moment that McTominay is always playing sideways passes, or at least he did under Solskjaer, which would represent the majority of this data. Given that Rangnick has only recently taken over. McTominay plays progressive passes about 10% of the time, given the amount of possession that he has in general. That's higher than Ruben Neves, and it's higher than Jorginho. I'm not making any comment about who is the better player out of those three, other than it's probably, almost certainly, not McTominay. But it is simply not true that he always, or indeed perhaps even, plays too many kind of short, safe sideways passes. When you only watch football on TV, it can be deceiving. Plus you pick up on what other people say. Really, really useful to look at what is actually happening. And that is all for today. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please express that by leaving a like. While you're there, you may as well subscribe to the channel. And while you're doing that, why not leave a comment? I'm going to be doing this sort of data-led review of what's going on and focusing on the Premier League, at least for now, alongside the match analysis, tactical-based videos. Let me know what you think, and we will see you next time.